Alright guys, welcome back to F1 News. The Saudi Arabian Grand Prix is over, another Red Bull 1-2. A decent time for Mercedes, all things considered, with a P4, P5 result, largely because Ferrari fell off a cliff in the race today, especially on the harder tyres. But Toto Wolff has said for Mercedes they've got big upgrades in the works, and since changing their concept behind the scenes, they've seen way more gains than they have done at the entirety of the last couple of seasons. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you guys are new as always. Let's just dive into the race, right? Do a quick race recap here. There wasn't that much that happened, let's be perfectly honest. The start was interesting though. Alonso got in front of Perez. That was never probably going to last. He also got a 5-second penalty, unfortunately, for a start position infringement. He lined up here on the grid, should have been further to the right, got a 5-second penalty for this. Perez eventually gets through. The first few laps are relatively interesting, and then towards the end, man, it was a Red Bull smoke show. As expected, I thought we were going to have to see some more overtakes from Verstappen, to be honest, and well, Leclerc was making some good moves early on. Of course, he was on the softer compound tyre at the start of the race, and then Verstappen was making passes. Hamilton started on the hards, which is a bit controversial, and in the end could have worked better for him if Stroll's kind of safety car incident happened later in the race. The fact that Hamilton had to pit like lap 20 for mediums was never going to be ideal for him towards the end of the race. Like, you're not really meant to do that way around. You're better do the 30 laps on the hards, 20 on the mediums, but you know, the safety car meant that Mercedes felt like they were forced into the other way. But Verstappen was never going to have too much difficulty. He was chilling out in the early laps. He did get helped massively by this safety car. He was already like well into his stint, and then Stroll kind of pulls over to the side of the road, is absolutely nowhere near the track at all. There was really no reason at all here to bring out a full safety car. Now, it's unclear exactly what the cause was. Aston Martin themselves say there was some issue in energy recovery, and they told Lance to stop the car right away. Thankfully, there were no issues affecting Alonso, but yeah, still, so Lance had to pull over to the side of the road, and apparently it was only a safety car because they didn't know where Stroll was. Their technology told them he was on the track still, and they didn't have enough cameras, so they thought Stroll was on the track, but he was actually off the track, and therefore they pulled a full safety car where only a VSC was necessary. And there will be questions immediately raised here about, you know, whether this is some sort of Liberty Media intention to try and keep the sport more entertaining, because every time a safety car is called rather than a VSC, there's inherently more entertainment involved because you go for a full restart again, there's more interesting passes going on. Of course, in this case, it massively helped Verstappen. Now, Verstappen was finishing P2 anyway. I don't think it really mattered what the case was with the safety car, but, you know, people are going to say, oh, a bit of a coincidence, right, that there was no need to call a full safety car, but they called one, just maybe for entertainment value. That might be what some would argue, but at the end of the day, it didn't really matter for the race result. But it did massively help Verstappen because he was getting up to like P7, and, you know, he was bumped right ahead of the Ferraris. The Ferraris, feel bad for them because they did such a cracking job on strategy here. They actually called a good strategy. They baited Stroll into a pit stop, I think, by saying that Sainz was going to pit, and it was just a masterclass from Ferrari for once, and then they get screwed over because the safety car comes out at an inopportune moment. Verstappen benefits, and it wasn't, well, it made quick work of the field. The best overtake, I think, probably of the day, at least what we really saw on broadcast, went to Hamilton on Sainz. Made a nice switch back in the first corner here to get this move done. No DRS involved, so he got ahead of the Ferrari there and was able to stay ahead of the Ferrari for the entirety of that final stint. Not sure really what the Ferraris were doing this weekend. They were fast at times in qualifying, but getting the performance in that hard tyre seemed impossible for the Ferraris. The Mercedes was okay on the hards, most of the other teams are okay on the hards, but the Ferraris were nowhere, and Hamilton, even after dropping back from Russell, which was pretty much expected given that, you know, towards the end of the race his medium tyres were going to fall off a cliff, I thought at least, like, still, Sainz wasn't able to close in at all, and they were so far off the pace of the Red Bulls, it's actually astonishing. And Red Bull's straight line speed, I don't know what they've done here. Like, they've actually built a rocket ship. It's absurd how fast he went past Russell here. They had the same thing last year, and even though this year the Mercedes and the Ferrari are faster in a straight line, Helmut Marko said before this Grand Prix that he reckons that they've got a 10 kph advantage on pure straight line speed to Ferrari, and that excludes their somehow ultra powerful DRS. I don't know what is in that car, but bloody hell, it went fast down the straight there. And that's why on circuits like this, there was just no defending from really anyone on the grid. There were some questions towards the end as to whether Alonso would get a 5-second pen. I don't believe that happened in the end, but it wouldn't have mattered regardless. And this was the case, right, that pretty much stayed this way with the Red Bulls. It might well have been the Aston Martins there as well. Then Russell, Hamilton. There was also a battle between Russell and Hamilton going on here because there was an interesting moment where Hamilton was closing in on Russell and was about to pass him. And then Russell was like, hey, I don't want to let Hamilton pass. Can we kind of battle here? Because Hamilton at that time was the faster car. But and then Russell thought, okay, I'll put my foot down a little bit and keep Hamilton behind. Were some questions though, because if there was to be a battle for P3, it might have made sense to let Hamilton go, try and make that happen, and if it doesn't, swap back, or Russell probably would have had the pace at the end of the race regardless. So bit of controversy there in the Mercedes camp, because Hamilton obviously wanted to get through. Russell said no, probably didn't matter at the end of the day, but regardless, some drama we've got to find in this race, because there wasn't much of it, to be honest. Now, again, Red Bull were baiting us all. Maybe they weren't baiting, but Verstappen was talking about some drive shaft problems, talking about probably some higher vibrations in the car, and he was like, look, there's something wrong. He did seem really concerned, actually. You can understand why after the events of qualifying, and even Perez was talking about the fact that he had this like long brake pedal that he was having issues with, and there was even talk, it was quite clear as well, that Red Bull were getting asked to drive to times. The times they were getting asked to drive to were about a second quicker than any other car on the track could manage. The Aston Martin was about a second behind. The Mercedes were talking 1.3 seconds behind, and that was conservative from Red Bull, right? Like, they were getting told to drive to times, and Perez was like, hey, Verstappen did a 32.6. Can I not go faster? Which eventually he did, and then I thought it was pretty entertaining, right? That over the radio, there were some good radio moments in the race. In fairness, he asked GP, "What's the fastest lap?" GP was like, "No, don't worry about that, Max. Like, we kind of almost want Perez to get it," and he's like, "Yeah, I care about it. It's a 32.1," and he got the fastest lap as well, which prevented Perez from leading the championship, which is pretty ice cold from Verstappen. But Perez did a great job here. I mean, it always felt to me that on this street circuit, he was going to get the job done. Perez was, well, a good job in the last stint, but at the end of the day, they were getting told to drive to times, and if Verstappen had been fully unleashed and didn't have any issues, like, I'd still have favoured him to win the race. But regardless, Alonso on the podium again, 100 podiums for Alonso, really cool story, and Mercedes P4, P5. All things considered, a good result for them given where they started out the weekends, especially compared to Hamilton's P10 last year that he got at this track. But it's the Ferraris, man. What are they playing at, right? They were shocking on the hard tyre. They couldn't get anywhere near Hamilton. Leclerc couldn't get anywhere near Sainz, and it was an absolute disaster class. But look, they're so far behind Red Bull, everyone on the grid right now, and that's clear as all to see. Red Bull are looking good for 23 race wins out of 23 races. It might not happen, but Toto Wolff has made comments before the race on the changes they're making to the car and how they're intending to get this Mercedes back to where they want it to be, stating that they're changing all the aerodynamic surfaces of the car, from the leading edge all the way to the diffuser and the beam wing. Literally, the car is being turned upside down at the moment, and there's a lot of goodness that we see. There's massive amounts on the floor, obviously, with a ground effect car, and then there's more architectural things that are necessary in order to give it the bodywork that you think is most efficient. He went on to say the following: they're making really big steps at the moment with their research and development, from our understanding in the wind tunnel and also in the simulators, and that is really big steps. Now, is he just saying this to keep Hamilton happy? I don't know. And also, it does make you wonder, like, they can't just have switched on the wind tunnel overnight with their new parts that they've made from Red Bull, because if they're actually using the wind tunnel here to test these new parts, they must have had these in the pipeline for some time, just because they can't just have overnight created all these parts that look like a Red Bull. Like, it must have been a longer process here, but he reckons at least that they've, whatever they're putting in the wind tunnel now, whatever new direction they're taking, that it's taken them arguably way too long to learn. They probably should have learnt this before. If they've like changed their mind relatively recently after Bahrain about what their plan is, and already they're seeing massive improvements, begs the question, why do they not try these things earlier? Why were they so eager to stick to their original concept, whereas now, as he says, we got it wrong, now we have that confirmation that we got it wrong, so don't write anything off. It's too late to think about the World Championship, but it's motor racing. If we continue the big steps we've done in the last 10 days, I think we will come to a stage where we will be able to fight for wins. So yeah, he reckons they can get this car to be where the Red Bulls are right now if their performance gains over the last 10 days behind the scenes are replicated on track. Whether they will be, that's of course another question mark, but he says, yeah, these are the biggest aero gains in the R&D department we've had in a very long time. We've unlocked potential because we've looked at things from a different angle, we have a different perspective because of the learnings. There was no step back in these learnings, on contrary, immediately 2 steps forward, because I think he said the other day that they might have to take a step back in their understanding to go 2 steps forwards with their new design, whatever they're coming up with. But yeah, apparently they're cooking something pretty special behind the scenes at Mercedes. It does beg the question, why didn't they just do this a bit earlier, given how quickly everything seems to be coming together behind the scenes? Is it really? Is Wolff just saying this to make sure Hamilton's happy because he hasn't been so happy with the car over the last few days? That's a bit of a question mark. Look, it's clear that Verstappen and Perez way ahead of the field. Their car is ridiculous, certainly around circuits like this as well. I think the gap was even greater probably here than it was at Bahrain, which is scary given that they were still holding things back. And as Russell said, says the gap they've got to the field is bigger than we've seen in Formula 1 for 6, 7, 8 years, which is probably true as it stands. And I mean, yeah, what Red Bull have done, excellent job, and fighting for the championship is probably not going to be there, but fighting for race wins in, let's just say, 10 races time, Mercedes feel might be possible as it stands. And Toto Wolff also hasn't ruled out the car might look like a Red Bull. He says, look, I don't care about what it looks like. We have no dogmatism of how the car should be. If it needs to be the quickest car possible, if it looks like a Red Bull, I don't care. It just needs to be quick. I will have no shame if it's quick. And says they're considering everything. So is that admission there from Toto Wolff that the car is going to look like a Red Bull, a Black Bull effectively? There's no shame in that either, because that's the way the regulations go. One team comes out of the gate swinging, they nail the new regs of Red Bull have, and over the next couple of years, most teams take heavy inspiration from those designs. That's always how it's been, that's always how it will be. There's no shame for Mercedes, but arguably they, in Hamilton's words in an interview he did last year, were maybe rather too arrogant, because he said don't be arrogant, and maybe they were on sticking with the concept they went with and are now changing it. So after the Grand Prix, these are the standings. Verstappen ahead of Perez after stealing the fastest lap off him. Alonso P3, Sainz P4, then Hamilton, Russell, Stroll and Leclerc. Tough day at the office for Leclerc, again, all things considered. The penalty only getting up to P7, not what he was looking for. Just a quick update on this, actually. I've just refreshed Twitter and I've seen that Alonso's got a 10-second penalty, unfortunately, for serving his penalty incorrectly. So that podium is now gone and Russell has the podium instead. So yeah, pretty remarkable stuff, but just wanted to let you guys know because I thought it was probably done and dusted. But no, there's still yet more to happen, unfortunately, for Mr. Alonso. Could prove crucial, actually, in the championship in terms of points, this one. So what I just mentioned in terms of points is entirely wrong, but hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.